Today we are slapping the bejesus out of a tier list. Yup. Cringe, I know. I'm well aware that tier lists are dumb, that's a fact. But this is a simple structure for me to lay out how I feel the tanks are performing right now currently on the Dragonflight beta. Before you go down to the comment section, let me just say this, that it's not going to be strictly based off of power. Even though we are using a tier list type format, instead of having an S, A, B, C tier, so on and so forth, we are actually going to rank them as either needs major tuning, minor tuning, or feels good and smooth. Basically, how do the tanks feel to play, and are they ready for Mythic Plus testing? Sound good? Okay, cool. Go hit that like button. As some of you may know, or not, I have spent roughly 120 hours of playtime over the last couple weeks testing the tanks on beta. Trust me, my mom's not proud. I've tested all 6 tanks quite rigorously. Different builds, talents, and of course in dungeons, you name it. I've also talked a lot about some of my favorite builds so far. You can actually find those videos down below in case you've missed any of them. With that being said, let's break down each tank and rank them. First things first though, let's start off with a quick disclaimer. This testing so far is strictly based on my heroic dungeon testing experience, both at a set item level and a scaled item level. I'm well aware that this type of content is extremely limiting when it comes to testing. This video isn't meant to predict a meta, but instead inform people on a subjective analysis of how I feel the tank should play up to this point. Also, there have been a ton of bugs with several classes that I'm going to try to talk about and hint on as I go through this. With that out of the way, let's start with what I think the most average tank is right now, and we can work around that. I'm pretty ecstatic to see Blood Death Knight return to its old chaotic playstyle. With the new tree and the removal of their Season 3 tier set, their kit is much less linear, and they actually have a ton of flexibility in both their spec tree and their class tree to hit multiple capstone choices, which really bolster their kit. While the gameplay flow feels much better, I would say that this is maybe one of the tanks that needs a pretty good damage tuning check. Now, I know I mentioned I wasn't going to talk much on a damage profile, but I think it's important to note that Blood Death Knights have fallen severely behind than other tanks in performance, often doing about 15 to 25% less damage than the other tanks. I may just be bad at the game, but I've tried pretty hard to optimize the throughput of this class with ultimately no luck. This might be some slight oversight, but we may not know until we actually can test harder content, because currently the talent capstone Umbilicus Eternus is giving me a shield large enough to cover a one-shot, which is insane for a tank to have access to. With the right talents, this has tremendous uptime and potential. This may outweigh the slight lack of damage, but we're going to see over the next couple weeks once we can actually begin Mythic Plus testing. So with that being said, I do think that this does need minor tuning. With the latest beta build, there were almost 0 changes to Guardian Druid, which left us bear boys feeling a little neglected. There were almost no updates and still some major bugs with Incarnation and the cooldown reduction component, which caused rage spending to grant recovery time towards Incarnation and Berserk. Yes, I said both because Blizzard separated them into 2 separate abilities that could be used independently from each other. Also, the cooldown reduction talent was extremely overtuned, since instead of giving us 1 second off for every 20 rage spent, it was giving us 20 seconds off for every 20 rage spent, allowing us to have permanent uptime on Incarnation if this talent was selected. Now, in a very recent minor hotfix, this issue was addressed, and now the class seems to be working as currently intended, which, in my opinion, still shit. While a Galactic Guardian playstyle is a cool concept, it lacks any real depth to the gameplay design and has a pretty poor implementation. With the latest build containing almost no notes or changes, I would like to believe that this is because Blizzard is actually planning on a much larger rework and tuning the class and the specialization. I know, pure hopium, but since this is the case, I think I'm going to place Bear in the expecting a major rework / tuning department. Alright, with some of the doom and gloom out of the way, let's talk about the rest of the tanks. Now, slight spoiler, they're all actually feeling really good, but let's go through them together. Brewmaster Monk so far has been my favorite tank to play on beta. While this class mostly feels the same when it comes to its kit, there are a ton of playstyles and builds that can cater to a lot of different scenarios or players' preferences. There are still a few known bugs with the tree. For example, the Weapon of Order capstone talent, Chi Surge, still will randomly proc during combat, which ends up having an insanely high uptime on the dot, which doesn't seem to be intended. Outside of this bug, it's pretty easy to play Brewmaster based on playstyle focusing on either purifying much more often with talent choices like Bone Dust Brew or Anvil and Stave and Special Delivery, Or another build that I've talked about before, which minimizes the need for CDs or rotational buttons, focuses a little bit more on spinning Crane Kick and Breath of Fire in cadence with Charred Passions. My only massive gripe with the tree is that it seems to lack a lot of self-sustained healing, which is a pretty important factor for Mythic Plus, but since we haven't been able to test that type of content yet, it's still up for debate and totally in the air. Not to even mention what our tier set might be. Regardless of which build you end up playing, it's pretty adaptable, and I think the spec is in a really good spot besides a few minor bugs. With the last build, Demon Hunter got a pretty large aura nerf, but accompanied with some individual buffs to specific abilities ranging anywhere between a 4 to 10% increase. This seems like Blizzard might be finalizing some of the tuning with the Vengeance Demon Hunter's damage and healing capabilities. While it can be seen as a good thing, I'm a little disheartened with the Demon Hunter tree still. It's hard to argue to make any advancements through the right side of the talent tree. Now, of course, the Fiery Brand talents are underwhelming due to the level of content that we are doing, which can absolutely be the case. I just can't imagine a world where it's playable and high-end Mythic Plus content, but I would love to watch this statement not age too well. They also fixed a bunch of bugs interacting with their frailty debuffs and damage stacking and multipliers, which is great. Because of this, I would love to believe that this is where they want the tanks to be when it comes to damage profiles. Outside of damage, the ability to self-heal and survive seems fine, though, as I've stated numerous times already, I think Mythic Plus testing will truly shine a light on how sturdy this tank feels. I think most of us are still trying to cope with the fact that we lost Blur, though notably insanely overpowered. I want to add one last note. After testing all tanks through countless runs, this is the one tank that I think feels the most clunky in terms of rotation fluidity. It seems with certain talent choices, the Fury generation gets slightly sporadic and leads to this disjointed rotation, especially with the tax cost to Spirit Bomb, but we'll just have to see. This class is pretty solid in terms of shipping. All that's left is for Mythic Plus. Protection Paladin started in this beta cycle as one of my least favorite tanks to play, and it was all doom and gloom. With the removal of Holy Power generation from Avenger's Shield, along with the extra Holy Power generation being removed from things like our tier set, this was really a big turnoff for the class. But over the last few weeks and hours upon hours of testing, this is easily one of my favorite tanks to play currently on beta. Well, besides Brewmaster, of course. There were a ton of bugs with the new iteration of Protection Paladin that was causing a lot of distaste. From the lack of damage to a completely changed in pace when it comes to the fluidity of the rotation and generation of Holy Power. This last build saw a few aura buffs and patched bugs that were causing talent choices like Seal of Order not to influence Blessing of Dusk properly regarding the cooldown recovery rates. Other talents like Tears Enforcer were not scaling properly with the extra talent point. This was also fixed. There are still a handful of bugs like, for example, Guardian of Ancient Kings actually will instantly reset upon casting Avenger's Shield, which I think is working just fine. While there is another playstyle option with a different talent build, the Dusk and Dawn build seems to be extremely enjoyable and is a very steady pacing of the rotation both inside and outside of cooldowns. Once those bugs are fixed, I'm actually extremely excited for how Protection Paladin is going to perform. This last build saw little changes to the Protection Warrior, so yes, you may all rejoice. For now. With little to zero nerfs coming through the latest build, it seems Blizzard is fairly content with where warriors are at currently in terms of fluidity, damage, and self-sustain. Now it's pretty easy to jump on board the warrior train, but once Mythic testing comes out, more than likely we're going to see them rein in the numbers a little bit. In this current state, I think most of us would be pretty happy with a Protection Warrior meta season, but let's not get too excited. Or, quite frankly, ahead of ourselves. With increased values coming into play, it's very possible that warriors will need to actually pull back a little bit on some of their offensive talent choices and target some more defensive talent choices like Spell Block. Though this is completely to be determined. But as long as Blizzard doesn't touch rage generation all that much or haste values with this class, it's going to feel extremely fun to play regardless. It's not overly complicated and has an insanely enjoyable feedback loop. And that does it. That's my pseudo rankings on which tanks are, I think, good for Mythic Plus testing, and which tanks I think need a little bit of attention. With the Dragonflight date announcement being confirmed for November 28th, I am eagerly waiting to see how the first season will turn out. I personally have never been more excited for an expansion than I am for Dragonflight, so buckle up. We got more testing to do. Huge shout out to all my Patreon supporters. I genuinely can't thank you guys enough for the support. It honestly it means the world to me. Hope you guys are all staying happy, healthy, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.